Saw an article in the paper the other day that said manufacturing can't come back as strong as it's been.
Well, you know, a lot of people say that, you know, the best days of American manufacturing are behind us. They're not ahead of us. I'm an optimist, Larry. I think that there are things that we can do that can grow and expand our manufacturing economy, number one. Number two, that the American worker on a level playing field can compete with any worker anywhere in the world and beat them. Unfortunately, we have not had a level playing field where we cause our workers to have to play in a playing field where we have a high tax, high regulatory environment, and they're competing against other jurisdictions with lower taxes and no regulations. And I'm not proposing zero taxes and no regulations. That would not be smart for our economy and our country. But we need to be smart the way we do it. But the American worker on a level playing field can compete with anybody and will beat them. So, you know, from the foundation, the strong foundation we have, to the ingenuity and hard work and industriousness of the American worker, to, and this would be my third point, a refocus on those areas where we know we do very well. I'll give you an example. In the United States, and specifically in Pennsylvania, we do phenomenal in medical device manufacturing. In my district, in the 8th Congressional District of Bucks County, some of the small businesses that are growing into medium-sized businesses that are manufacturing in our part of Pennsylvania and are shipping that product not just across Pennsylvania but throughout the world, they're high-tech, biotech, pharmaceutical-based, and medical device manufacturing operations. Because we've got great educational systems in Pennsylvania. We've got not just hardworking workers, we have well-educated workers. What I heard from medical device manufacturers, and I visited several by our manufacturing industries to have real competition with the countries that continue to cause problems for us. One is China. China manipulates their currency. They dump steel on our shores.
You hear that phrase a lot, manipulates currency. Tell us briefly what it means.
Well, what it means is that you know, they are in a very non-competitive way changing the value of their currency, making the dollar less competitive in the foreign market. And so, you know, when they manipulate their currency, they subsidize their products. They then dump those products here at a loss to them, but the state, the nation state of China, the country of China, is subsidizing their products. They're dumping those subsidized products on the shores of this country in a way that the hardworking, industrious, smart, you know, normally very, very competitive American manufacturer can't compete with that, because they're not only competing with the Chinese worker, they're competing with the Chinese worker and the Chinese government and a manipulated Chinese yuan against everybody here in this country. So, you know, there's only so much that we can do. We can take on a fair level playing field any worker anywhere in the world, but we can't do so where you've got the entire country working against you. And by the way, from a tax policy and trade policy, their country's working for them, and our country sometimes working against the American worker.
So what kind of changes would you like to put in effect if you could?
We need to have trade policy which is fair. We can't be afraid to trade with other countries. We just need to make absolutely certain that every trade agreement we enter into is fair to the American worker and allows them to produce here and to be able to sell their product and compete with their products in other countries, number one. Number two, we need to make certain that our tax policy is competitive and is fair. Right now, the United States of America has the highest corporate tax in the industrialized world. No country has a higher tax than the United States of America. It's 35%. And so when you add that to the product and you ship it overseas, the product is becoming less competitive. Other consumers less able to purchase it. And less purchases overseas means less production in this country, and that's not good. So I am the co-sponsor of a bill that would do two things, that would reduce the corporate tax, the federal corporate tax, from 35% to 25%. At the same time, the second thing we need to do is eliminate the loopholes, the tax deductions, the tax credits, all that sort of tax underbrush under the 35% rate that sometimes permits some companies that could afford to pay a higher rate, permits them to pay nothing. Because they take, and some of the largest employers in our country actually pay an effective tax rate, federal corporate tax rate of 0, because they're taking advantage of all the loopholes that they've had specifically written into federal tax law. So the second thing I think we need to do is we need to lower the corporate tax rate, clear out the underbrush of the deductions and loopholes, and in the process, what I believe would happen, and I think history proves this, that you actually, in lowering the rate, you expand the base of taxpayers, so you make certain that everybody actually pays the real rate.
There are more people in the pool.
More people in the pool, more people paying the tax, expand the base, and raise the revenue to the federal government. So that gets you actually to the next issue we probably should be discussing, which is the annual budget deficit and the national debt, which also makes us non-competitive globally, internationally. So once you raise revenue to the federal government through a better, more competitive tax policy, you begin to pay off the national debt by eliminating the annual budget deficit to 0, which hopefully we can do soon.
And talk more about the budget deficit and what it means to the average citizen.
Well, the annual budget deficit, we have a president right now who has submitted 4 budgets and 4 successive $1 trillion annual budget deficits. In other words, the president has proposed to spend $1 trillion more than the federal government brings in. Any business that spent on a consistent basis more money than it brings in would be bankrupt. Any family that consistently spent more dollars than it brought in income would be in mortgage foreclosure. We cannot continue to operate the federal government in a way that the current administration has had us operating. And it's not just that Democrats and Republicans have added to a situation where we have a national debt that is ultimately unsustainable in the long term and a burden on our children and our grandchildren. So 4 consecutive years of $1 trillion plus annual budget deficits has increased the national debt from what it was 4 years ago when President Obama took office, probably about $10 trillion, to $16 trillion today, and on a trajectory to be, if President Obama wins another 4 years, it's on a trajectory to go to $20 trillion unless we reverse it. Larry, you asked, what does that mean to the average citizen of Pennsylvania? 300 million citizens in our country, $16 trillion national debt. The quick math is it's about $50,000 per man, woman, and child in Pennsylvania, our share of the national debt. And that's for spending that's not spending in the future, that's something that's going to be built. This is spending that's already occurred and has been spent on federal programs and supposed to be doing roads and bridges and water treatment plants that haven't been built, should have been built, but haven't been built. We have not invested in our infrastructure the way we should have, but we still have this incredible $16 trillion national debt. That $50,000 per man, woman, and child, that's only the principal amount of the debt. That doesn't include the interest. I mean, as you know, if you purchase a home, you have your principal, then you have your interest, and then the third number on the sheet is the total of payments, principal plus interest, is a pretty big number. My wife Kathy and I have 6 children, so our share of the national debt is $400,000. That's just principal. That does not include interest. For a federal government that continues to spend more than it brings in, knowing that we're giving that kind of a national debt to our children is wrong. And so that's why I have made it a particular interest of mine, given my background in local government and in representing small businesses, that we need to bring the annual budget deficit back down to 0 and get us at least on a glide path toward paying off our national debt. We need to get to a balanced budget and pay off the national debt so that our children can inherit not a huge $16 or $20 trillion national debt, but a federal government that's productive, that's growing, that's creating jobs, and that has the revenue to invest in the infrastructure so that the United States of America can continue to be competitive well into the future for them. In other words, our children and grandchildren deserve the same kind of country with the same kind of opportunities and freedoms and liberties, the same kind of jobs and growth that we had when we were growing up, and the same kind of America we inherited from our parents.